We'll have to see. Of course, apologies, because this meeting was supposed to take place in very early August. At the time, NCT was the victim of a cyber attack, so we had to delay. But I did think at that point, well, perhaps one of the benefits of delaying till September would be that the evenings would be a bit cooler, perhaps a bit darker, and it'd be more in keeping with an evening talk such as this. But of course, what I didn't take into account was that we might be having a mini heat wave, but there we go. If you are watching me this evening with a cool pint of lager in your hand or cool pint of beer, then cheers. Equally, if you're watching me with a mug of tea, cheers as well. So here we go. So when Jeff and I came up with the title for this evening's talk, it was very much with the enhanced partnership issue in mind. You'll appreciate that bus operators and local authorities are deep in talks at the moment, putting together bus service improvement plans. I'm not in a position this evening to give you the detail of what's going to be in Nottingham's bus service improvement plan, because I'll be very honest, we haven't agreed the draft yet. As you know, we are working on a very tight timescale. We aim to have it pretty much done and dusted by the end of September, because it's got to be going in October. We'd like to be ahead of the game if we can be. But we meet for the first time to look at the draft BSIP on Thursday afternoon this week. So what I am going to do this evening is give you a bit of an introduction into where the public transport market is in Nottingham, and then look at 10 specific points which we have been considering for inclusion in the BSIP, which are subjects, matters raised throughout the buses back better document that you may have read, the National Bus Strategy, and we'll take it from there. But you know, we are, as Jeff says, I'm treating this evening that we're amongst friends. I'm sure we can deal with it in a friendly manner, and if you want to ask me anything, feel free to do so. If you have read the Buses Back Better document, it's very aspirational, and please, this isn't meant to sound arrogant in any way, but much of what it talks about, turn up and go frequencies, high quality vehicles, low emissions, good quality staff, high customer satisfaction, they all sound very much like the likes of Nottingham, Brighton, Oxford, don't they? Reading, perhaps, which is great. It's nice to be held up as an example of best practice. But bear in mind, we're putting these BSIPs together to compete for government money. And when you're already doing a lot of the things that are mentioned in the BSIP, that perhaps puts a bit more pressure on us than there already is. And as a warning, Nicola Tidy, who's you know has been marketing director at Nottingham for best part of 20 years now, just stepping down to a new part-time role, she did say to me only today, David, I think our BSIP's going to need to be a bit sexier. So we'll have to work on that as we go through the next few weeks. So there's only one place really to start. You know, this is an Omnibus Society meeting. Jeff's already referred to it. I can't start anywhere other than September 2018. The Omnibus Society presidential weekend, my predecessor, the Right Honourable Mark Fowles, was president that year, and we had this wonderful display in the square, which coincided with the 140th anniversary of the commencement of horse tram operations in Nottingham, Nottingham District Tramways Company being the predecessor of Nottingham City Transport. 140 years, wonderful achievement. And you see there we had buses and trams representing the various stages in our history. You'll note there's a West Bridgford bus there on the right-hand side. Further down the line, a South Notts vehicle, two eminent local companies that came under NCT's control through the years. But the main reason for showing this photograph, apart from indulging you for a few minutes, is that on this day, the City Council estimated something like 15,000 people visited our display in the square. And that's the kind of reminder, if we needed one, that, you know, buses do matter to people, don't they? And we are part of the, buses are part of the social history, the social fabric of an area. People grow up with buses, live with buses, and they do take an interest in them. And if there's one message we have to keep reminding ourselves about as operators and local authorities, put these BSIPs together, is that it's got to be about the customer. We can get distracted into the arguments about franchising versus enhanced partnerships. We can get distracted about the ownership structure. But ultimately, this is about exceeding patronage levels that we had prior to COVID. And we're only going to do that if we concentrate on the customer and giving the best possible service to the people that are going to use the buses, hopefully, going forwards. So just to indulge you for a few minutes, one of the key events that's happened in our history, of course, was the takeover of the West Bridgford undertaking 1968. I know this will particularly please Michael Elliott, who's watching this, who's dialed into this display, this talk this evening. We celebrated the 100th, what would have been the centenary of West Bridgford undertaking in 2014. Drivers told me that without doubt it was the most photographed bus in Nottingham that they'd ever driven. It's down there in the bottom right-hand corner, sorry, left-hand corner. West Bridgford was an unusual undertaking, wasn't it? Operated on two key corridors. The top photograph, the bus on the right, is operated on the West Bridgford corridor. Bus on the left on the Clifton corridor. West Bridgford didn't actually have its own services other than two dedicated school routes within its urban district council. Both West Bridgford and Clifton were jointly operated. And one of the themes in the Buses Back Better document talks about interavailability of tickets, operators perhaps accepting each other's return tickets, day tickets, and not adverse to the idea, probably more relevant where multi-operator ticketing isn't appropriate. But just a warning, one of the reasons the West Bridgford undertaking didn't survive, undoubtedly it didn't, critical mass was one of its issues. There's only a fleet of 28 vehicles, but it always blamed the inter-ticketing arrangements for being its downfall. The fact that West Bridgford was disadvantaged compared to the city over the revenue sharing arrangements that it had. So if we are going to look at inter-ticketing, inter-availability of ticketing as part of EP, that's the kind of thing we have to think about. Yeah. It isn't as easy as it sounds to come up with revenue sharing agreements. And if we're going to go down that road, we've got to make sure that it's fair to everybody. As I say, the bus on the left there, the Regent 5 on the left there, was on the Clifton, operating the Clifton corridor. That's why it's low height, because it had to go under Wilford Lane Railway Bridge. That was a tripartite agreement, wasn't it? Clifton was shared between three operators, NCT, West Bridgford and South Notts. Interesting. Why is it locked up on me? There we go. South Notts, the third operator on the Clifton routes, came under the NCT fold in 1991. I'm sure you've probably read in the trade press, very sadly, we've closed the Gotham garage this year. People, perhaps as history, as time goes on, won't realise that for a third of the 95 years that Gotham was a bus garage, it was actually an NCT garage rather than the South Notts one. South Notts was a celebrated local operator very low fares and high ridership. Was its ridership high because of its low fares, or was it able to charge low fares because of high ridership? We could debate that one all evening, I suspect, couldn't we? But clearly a very strong brand, even though Gotham Garage is now sadly closed, been sold to housing. We maintain the South Notts brand. It's certainly a brand of repute, which we're keen to maintain and protect in the Nottingham-Loughborough bus corridor. One other operator that we've taken over not so long ago, about 25 years ago now, people forget this one, was Pathfinder. Pathfinder was born out of Worthingtons of Collingham in the Newark area. And Pathfinder was pretty much new start at deregulation. It revolutionised the Nottingham-Southall corridor. Prior to deregulation, for those of you that know the area, the Southall service basically had an appalling bus route to Nottingham via the Trentside villages. And the reason for that was supported by the County Council. I'm not criticising anybody, and by the way, I'm just saying how it was. As part of the desire to connect with railways, there was no direct Nottingham-Southall service. As I say, the Nottingham bus service went via Thurgerton, Fiskerton to connect with the trains at Fiskerton station for onward travel to Southall. Wasn't something people wanted to do. We know people don't particularly like change. And again, it may be a nice aspiration to have more joined up thinking between bus and rail. But we have to think about the practical side of it as well. For connecting long distance to short distance, there might be a role, but mixing local distance journeys between bus and rail, I don't think particularly works. And this was clearly an example where in the deregulated environment, Pathfinder took advantage of the fact that the established service was trying to connect with rail. And the bus then started to do what it should have done, which was to concentrate and acknowledge the fact that bus is primarily competing with car, and therefore took the direct route to Southall, which you would take if you were driving your car between those 2 points. The reason I've included the photograph in the bottom right-hand corner, this is Newark Depot. We've not had Newark Depot now for 20 years, but we inherited this with Pathfinder. You'll see an array of Optare Solos there, operating on various routes, because the purchase of Pathfinder very nicely coincided with the commencement of Rural Bus Grant. And you'll all remember Rural Bus Grant, where the new Labour government threw a lot of money at new rural services aimed at improving accessibility to employment. I readily acknowledge and don't criticise, but it's fair to say none of those routes survive today. They were all born through Rural Bus Grant, and by and large, they went away when the Rural Bus Grant monies dried up. So, point I've been making during our debate in Nottingham about the BSIP is that whatever we do, because we know that there's probably, well, we know the headline figure is 3 billion for BSIP initiatives, don't we? But when you take the 4,000 zero emission vehicles and the 226 million that's in the bus recovery fund for the next 7 months, we're probably in truth looking at nearer 1.8 billion for BSIP initiatives, aren't we? And there's no guarantee the funding goes beyond the term of this government. You know, this may just be a 3-year window that we've got to make the most of. And I do keep making the point that whatever we do, it's got to be sustainable and have longevity beyond the 3 years of this initiative. Let's not make the mistake, well-intentioned mistakes that, you know, heavy caveat, that were made with Rural Bus Grant Whatever we spend this money on, because there's not a lot of it really, and it may not be very long, we must ensure there's longevity and sustainability at the end of it. We want something to show for it. And I just put that up as a warning. The other big thing NCT has been involved with in recent years, of course, was Nottingham's tram. Whether you think trams represent value for money or not, it cannot be disputed. The tram revolutionised public transport in this city, lifted the profile of it considerably. NCT recognised under Mark's leadership that it needed to raise its game if bus wasn't going to be seen as a poor substitute for tram. And public transport in Nottingham has prospered over the last 20 years, and we can't ignore the fact that the big catalyst for that really was the introduction of Nottingham's tram back in 2004. We were devastated, if truth was known, in 2011 when we were notified that our consortium hadn't been selected as the preferred bidder to extend the network to Clifton and Beeston. And sadly, at that point, genuine ticket interavailability with no premium ended at that point, because up to 2011, NCT tickets were valid on the tram. Well, most of them were valid on the tram, but no premium. And clearly that's the sort of aspiration that is in the Buses Better document that is certainly going to be one of the subjects we'll look at in the BSIP. So, as a state of play, you all know the Transport Department of the City Council was set up as arm's length business in 1986. Our local authority owner maintained 100% control till 2000. It sold an 18% stake at that point, basically to raise the £5 million that NCT needed to partake in the Arrow Consortium, which operated the tram very successfully until 2011. Nottingham's tram now operated by Keolis, another French multinational business specialising in light rail. And in many ways, make no bones about it, tram has been very much a competitor for NCT since that point. Miraculously, we think we're about the 5th largest private sector employer in Greater Nottingham, way behind the likes of Boots and Experian, but nevertheless, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of NCT to the local economy. Clearly the biggest operator in Nottingham itself, second largest municipal in the UK behind Lothian, 1,100 staff, of which 800 are drivers, very much a flat profile sort of business. 2/3 of all bus journeys in Greater Nottingham are with NCT. And pre-COVID, we were very proud to be carrying 1 million passengers a week. That's 1 million passengers on a very intense urban bus network. And average fare per passenger just over £1, giving us annual turnover of around about 53 million. And we've been able to provide steady dividends to our 2 shareholders, Nottingham City Council and Transdev. And we were able to do that even though we believe at the time we could boast the lowest fares of any of the English core cities. Now that might change post-COVID, because there's certainly various initiatives happening in the West Midlands, but certainly up to March 2020, we believe we had the lowest fares of any core city. Very much principle of stack them high and sell it cheap sort of approach. So what makes NCT a bit different from a typical commercial business? Because we are a commercial business. It might have something to do with our shareholders' objectives to provide a sustainable, affordable and quality bus service. I wonder how many bus companies can say that's one of their core ingrained objectives. A new addition post 2011, which will work out for yourselves, to take due account of and integrate with other fixed modes of public transport operating in Nottingham. And it's quite very clear what that's aimed at. Of course, it's Nottingham's tram. But to lead to long-term expansion of public transport patronage rather than short-term retention or gain, with ongoing profitability enabling steady dividends to shareholders. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Believe me, that's not easy to achieve. But I don't think there's many bus companies with that sort of objective ingrained into the business. So at March 2020, we had a fleet, we still have a fleet of 310 buses. A third of the fleet's now powered by biomethane, which we're very proud of. We boast the largest fleet of double-deck biogas buses in the world. Buses in that picture aren't biogas, they're E400 diesels. The whole fleet's DDA compliant, of course. Every bus has got audio and visual next stop displays and announcements. Our double-deckers typically have 14 CCTV cameras, and they're not lost on me that Transport Focus, who only today have issued a document believing what they think should be set out in the BSIPs, includes efforts to tackle antisocial behaviour and enable people to feel safe on the bus. And that's something that we do very well in our customer survey results, which I'll talk about in a bit, always give us very high scores for feeling safe on the bus. All our buses are fitted with real-time information. I'll talk a bit more about it in a bit. Every inbound bus stop in the city of Nottingham now has a real-time display, which I think is a great achievement to be able to boast as well. The success story in Nottingham isn't just about NCT. It's not just about other operators. It is about genuine partnership working. And the fact we've got a real-time display at every inbound bus stop within the administrative area of the City of Nottingham is credit to the City Council. All buses since 2014 have had USB charging points. The whole fleet has free Wi-Fi. And because we've invested so heavily in the biogas fleet, we can currently boast an average fleet age, vehicle age in the fleet of just 5 years. People generally don't travel around in 10-year-old cars. The argument is, why should we expect them to arrive around in a 10-year-old bus? Our network is controlled from this operations control centre. Some operators would say that it's very decadent. We don't think, well, it may be decadent, but we think it's very important. This is manned 24/7, because of course we have a small network of night bus routes as well. We don't normally have 5 controllers on at the same time. It's typically 2 in the off-peak and 3 in the peak. I can only think when we took this photograph, we were dealing with a particular event, whether it be Goose Fair or the Nottingham Marathon, closure of Clifton Bridge, something like that, for someone to be in every seat. But we think it's money well spent. And that control room looks after this network. As I say, we have a PVR currently of 270 buses running around on this very intense urban network. All the thick lines on there display that the frequency of service is at least every 10 minutes. To be honest, in most cases on there, the frequencies are as high as every 3 minutes. So we've got 270 buses running around on this intense network, rarely going more than 5 miles from the city centre, but providing a very traditional high frequency turn up and go city bus operation. That's how we look on paper. This is how we look out there on the road. Route branding features very heavily on our fleet, and I think we get it about right. We have the overriding brand, of course, Nottingham City Transport, but we do have sub-brands that go with it. Top right-hand corner is our Bridgeford bus brand. You'll recall at one time we did have the Go-To brand, which we've tend to let go now, because it led to situations such as West Bridgeford, where we had 2 routes branded the 6 and the 10 as go-to, indicating they ran every 10 minutes. But it overlooked the fact that the key frequency between Nottingham and West Bridgford Centre was every 5. So we introduced the Bridgford bus brand as a sub-brand, very much promoting the 5-minute headway that we provide between Nottingham City Centre and West Bridgford Town Centre via the important destinations of the railway station and Trent Bridge. But it's not just about the network, it's not just about what the buses look like, it's very much about the staff. The bus industry remains one of the traditional labour-intensive industries, isn't it? There's not that many about these days, but the bus industry remains one of them. And this is probably our proudest achievement. I mean, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, yes, we have been UK Bus Operator of the Year 5 times, but I'm far more proud of this. It's probably fair to say 20 years ago, if you'd have done a straw poll of people in Nottingham, asking them if they thought their local bus company had the best bus drivers in Britain from a customer service point of view, you'd have probably got some fairly negative reactions. I think we've moved mountains in the last 20 years, invested very heavily through our training in our drivers, emphasising the importance of good customer service. You know, we started from a disadvantage of the fact that we are a no change operator, we don't give change. 2/3 of our customers probably do a transaction with their smart card. So the interaction time between drivers and customers is very, very brief, probably about a second, which doesn't give you long to get it wrong, but equally it doesn't give you very long to get it right either. So we spent a lot of time emphasising the importance to our drivers of smiling and acknowledging our customers, even if that's the extent of the interaction. But you know, there's 9 drivers there. 3 of them have been the UK's top national bus driver, and that is a phenomenal achievement that we're rightly proud of. So the things we're going to concentrate on the BSIP are the things that matter to our customers. We do a lot of customer survey information. We glean a lot of data from our customers. And we always ask our customers to rank their top 5 factors. What are the most important features of their bus service? And you probably won't be surprised to see that at the very top is always turning up on time. If I'm going to give the bus the benefit of the doubt and use it, I at least want it to turn up when you say it's due, it's going to turn up. So buses running on time, buses running very frequently so that they haven't got to refer to a timetable is a close second. Look how important the drivers are. And again, this is a point we constantly make to our staff. Look how important you, the frontline people, are. Able to get a seat's important, far more important than the fare. Offering value for money only comes 5th. Now you could say, well, it's 5th because your fares are already low. I don't know. I just think it puts into perspective the fact that there are factors that people consider when deciding whether or not to use the bus, way ahead of what is the fare. The public transport market in Nottingham has bucked the national trend in the last 20 years. You'll see that back in 2004, when the tram was introduced, the total public transport market in Nottingham was around about just short of 67 million journeys a year. That now stands at nearly 82, 83 million a year. And it would be very easy to look at that graph and think, oh, well, it's very clear what's happened there. Bus usage has remained stable and all the growth has been on the tram. Well, of course, that isn't the real story at all. I understand why you might think that. But you have to bear in mind, probably 8 million of that 17 million using the tram were previously bus users. So bus patronage hasn't stood still. it's had a big hit over the 20 years in terms of transfer to tram, because not surprisingly, the tram operates on what were the 3 busiest bus corridors. So the bus has had to reinvent itself in many ways to maintain the passenger base that it had. And we've generally done that, certainly at NCT, by growing the student market significantly. There's been a revolution in student bus travel in Nottingham over the past 20 years, much of it due to government initiatives to get 50% of 18-year-olds into higher education. And without Nottingham's universities, our economy would be much worse, it has to be said. But there's a different story to this graph. Both bus and tram, both modes, have played a significant part in growing the public transport market in Nottingham over the last 20 years. And this is how we compare with other areas. I nicked this slide off one of my colleagues at the City Council, so I can't tell you why the likes of Leicester are in there. I suspect Leicester's there because they're our neighbours, and it's nice to have a bit of a dig. I'm surprised we've not put Derby on there. Perhaps they wouldn't even make it onto the graph. But clearly we've got some metropolitan areas there and Leicester. And Nottingham City and Greater Nottingham compares favourably with all of those, doesn't it? In that we really have booked the national trend over the last 20 years. One of the reasons we've been able to do that is by attracting people out of their car. Around about a third of our customers, one of the questions we always ask our customers in our annual research, bear in mind our annual research normally consists of about 14,000 surveys, individual surveys, is could you make the journey you're making today by bus in a car? So have you got a car available for the journey you're choosing to make today by bus? And typically around about a third of our customers say they have. On some routes, particularly in the West Bridgford area, that's over 40%. So 4 in 10 of our customers in West Bridgford choose to leave the car at home, catch the bus. Lots of reasons: value for money, ease of access to the city centre, ease of access to the rail station. They're all factors. We pat ourselves on our back and say, marvellous, what a great job we've done. But something I always say to the new drivers when I go and meet them on the morning that they sign out from the school is, yes, it's a great achievement, but it's a massive threat, isn't it? Because if we get it wrong, if we upset them, if we don't run on time, if the driver snarls at them, they've got a ready-made alternative sitting on the drive. So in many ways, this should keep me awake at night, because we know that if we don't deliver the service, a third of our customers could disappear at the spin of a hat because they've got a car sitting on their drive as an alternative. So this all manifests itself in the fact that apart from Brighton, Nottingham's got the highest bus use per head of population outside London at 145, which I believe is more than 3 times the national average, something we're very proud of. So you won't be surprised to know that, as I said earlier, NCT doesn't take all the credit for this. Nottingham has a long history of partnership working, which clearly Buses Back Better wants to emulate across the country. We've had a formal bus partnership, statutory bus partnership in Nottingham for over 10 years now. Very much to put statutory obligations, it has to be said, onto the local authority. So the local authority has an obligation to provide infrastructure. Local authority has an obligation to maintain bus penetration in the city centre. If you look on that map at the top right-hand corner, the streets coloured in green are now bus-only areas, pedestrians and buses only. Traditionally, they were all through routes for through traffic. These days, they're bus and pedestrian areas only. not forgetting, of course, the dreaded hackney carriage. So it's not all down to NCT, and credit where it is due. It's due to all bus operators and a very proactive local authority. Infrastructure is important, isn't it? I mean, this photograph was taken in Nottingham city centre 30 years ago on clearly an adverse day for weather. Can you believe our city centre bus stops have shelters? Real time we take for granted now. Those poor folk standing in blizzard conditions in what I suspect sub-zero temperatures. No indication when the next bus is coming. There is, to be fair, a timetable case on the stop that you can see. But if you look at the state of the road, I very much suspect buses weren't running to timetable. So customers are waiting there in the hope and the belief a bus will eventually turn up with no protection from the elements. And that's a city centre bus stop in Nottingham just 30 years ago. By putting statutory obligations on the local authority, every city centre stop now has real-time display, well-lit shelter, seating in the shelter area, in addition to the real-time display, very comprehensive timetable information on the stop, route map on the stop, not just of the route that's being served, but of, I got distracted there, but as I say, not of the network as well. A network route map is on there as well. And of course, we've got the accessible curb to accommodate the low floor buses. CCTV cameras in the city centre shelters as well to complement the CCTV that we have on the buses. Initially, bear with me, occasionally I'm not quite sure why it's doing this. There we go. I know what to do, don't panic, I'm all right. Initially, it applied to these 95 stops around the city centre. 10 years on, as I alluded to earlier, the obligation to provide real-time displays has been rolled out to all stops in the city of Nottingham. This is a typical suburban bus stop in Wilford, right on the edge of the administrative city area. But even this stop, which isn't a not a highly patronised stop, it's inbound. So as you can see there, this is a photograph I took one evening in August, typical balmy summer's evening. It's got a well-lit shelter, it's got seating, it's got a real-time display and timetable information in the stop, plus raised curb, because it's an inbound bus stop, something we're very proud of. And we want to see that rolled out further across the entire NCT network as part of the BSIP initiative. So based on everything I've said, you may not be surprised to know that certainly, I think in the last 20 years, there's been at least 3 investigations into the UK bus market. One by the Competition Commission, probably 7 or 8 years ago, which concluded there wasn't enough competition in the bus market. The most recent one was an inquiry into the health, i.e. the profitability of the market, by the Transport Select Committee, probably 2018, when Lillian Greenwood, one of our local MPs, was chairperson. Nottingham's always been complimented in these documents and these investigations. And you won't be surprised to know that our general approach has been, we think the market is okay. We're reasonably happy with the status quo. We don't recommend any big changes. We think that as far as Nottingham goes, things are probably about right. And from the information I've shared with you, I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. But clearly, what we hadn't bargained for was this: the crash arising from COVID. Overnight, as was the case across the UK, our patronage, our business collapsed. Within a space of about 10 days, our patronage went from normal levels down to about 10%. And we had to introduce this emergency network of just core routes running every 30 minutes. We did that with a team of volunteer drivers. We needed 120 drivers to run the network, and we just scraped through that number of volunteers. And we ran this emergency network right through for 3 months. Unsure what the future held, we are very grateful for CBSSG putting politics to one side. I think government has done a commendable job in supporting the bus industry through what has been a traumatic 18-month period, and it has at least given us all revenue security in underwriting our cost levels. But where do we go now? And this is where hopefully Buses Back Better is going to give us, perhaps not, if not the answers, at least some much needed assistance. We've worked very hard in promoting our bus services to the people of Nottingham, encouraging to come back to us. And patronage is improving slowly, but I have to say, probably for 2 months now, our ridership levels have stubbornly been stuck at around the 2/3 base. I know some areas are doing better than that, some are doing not so good, but we're stubbornly stuck at about 64-65%. And so we're really now looking for initiatives to take us to the next level, and hopefully this will help us on our way. As I said earlier, we're on a very tight time scale. We haven't got the argument in this area over franchising or enhanced partnership. We are going for enhanced partnership. There's no appetite for franchising in Nottingham. There's no desire to mend what is broken. Member of understanding went in from the local authorities as required. And as I say, we have a meeting this Thursday to go through the first draft of our BSIP. What I'm going to do now is talk about the BSIP, but I'm going to look at 10 key factors that we're looking to include, or at least giving consideration as to whether we need to include them, and whether, despite what we have achieved, there's no resting on our laurels here, are there still further things that we could do? Is there the opportunity, if funding is available, to create more turn up and go frequencies? Is there a need? One of the aspirations in the document is to make it simpler for people to understand. Should there be one brand for Nottingham's public transport network? Do we need to coordinate route numbers and have simpler routes coordinated between the various operators in our city? Do we need lower fares? I hate the phrase cheaper fares. I always think cheap is associated with nasty. I'd much rather, although the document refers to cheaper fares, I prefer to talk about whether there's the option for any lower fares and any further options for certainly daily price capping our own products, and indeed daily capping on the multi-operator ticketing that we have. Is there room for better integration, not just between different operators, but also with rail? Interesting one and a contentious one. Is there overbussing in Nottingham and an option to move some resource to less well-bussed corridors? I think all operators are in agreement that, of course, we would like faster and more reliable services. It's the #1 priority of our customers, as you've seen. And in the longer term, could we develop perhaps some BRT corridors on the back of that? And finally, but certainly not least, this is a crucial one. And in the trade press, the eminent Chris Cheek hasn't been shy to say that perhaps this factor, number 10, could be the biggest saviour of all for the bus industry in the post-COVID environment. So if I take them one at a time, and I'm conscious of the time, I will promise to be finished by about 15:15. Well, do we need more free? Is there room for more frequent services? I'm not sure there is, to be quite honest. As I've said, we're running on most corridors at least every 10 minutes, on many of them every 3 minutes. It's an intense network that doesn't go more than 5 miles generally from the city centre. Our service has certainly only got 3 routes. The one to Loughborough, the old South Notts route, the old Pathfinder route to Southall, and the service out to Woodborough that you would consider to be anything like rural. Everything else is part of our intense city network, running on very high frequencies. I don't think we'll be pursuing more frequent services in Nottingham on the back of the BSIP. This is an interesting one and a contentious one. Do we need a single brand for Nottingham's public transport network? Now, if anywhere is big in branding, it's Nottingham, isn't it? Trent Barton led the way in many ways with branding, along with the likes of Brighton and Hove 20 years ago. Trent have always concentrated on branding specific to their routes. Indigo is a well-known brand in the Nottingham Derby corridor. It's the old Barton service, isn't it? The old Barton 5 corridor to Derby via Long Eaton and Beeston. Indigo is very much the brand. Well, as customers know, there's no obvious big Trent Barton logo on there, is there? There is one. There is a Trent Barton logo on the front, but it's not nearly as prominent as the Indigo brand. Do we really need to spoil that question? I've explained the branding that we do ourselves. Nottingham City Transport is a bigger brand name because we are an intense urban network where the name is useful. Perhaps Trent have always argued their route brand is far more important to their customers in a specific corridor because they're not providing a network, they're really providing corridors of services. We provide a network, hence the Nottingham City Transport name is more prominent, but our route branding is still prominent too. And the third well-known brand, of course, is NET, the tram system. Would we really want to throw away what I think are 3 reputable local brands to replace with something else? May I be slightly contentious and suggest there may be some cities in the UK where operator names perhaps aren't as reputable as they could be, and a new, fresh brand may assist. God, does that sound arrogant? It's not meant to. But I think in Nottingham, we've got three good, strong brands. We wouldn't want to throw those away. But in saying that, I think we do recognise that there is some merit in perhaps having an overarching brand, and that will most likely be Robin Hood. No surprise, it's Nottingham, Robin Hood. What else would anyone think of? And indeed, to some extent, we've already adopted that. We have the Robin Hood multi-operator travel card. This is the Robin Hood network, as we call it. It includes all operators services in that area. And indeed, it's likely, because Robin Hood covers the greater Nottingham area, as opposed to just the city of Nottingham area. One thing I can share with you is that the BSIP for the city of Nottingham will encompass the neighbouring districts of Gedling, Broxtowe and Rushcliffe. And it will be actually the Robin Hood, I suspect, initially Greater Nottingham Enhanced Partnership Area, I suspect. When we produce the final document, we'll be calling it the Robin Hood Enhanced Partnership Area. So in addition to an overarching brand, do we need, as operators, to talk about common route numbering and good publicity? Well, we at Nottingham City Transport have been through this process 20 years ago. That was our route network in 1999. Now, we're all bus people, but I challenge any of you to work out where the buses went. I know where they went because, you know, it's my company, I know where their services went. But I challenge anybody else to genuinely work out where Service 5 went. And it always makes me tickle when I see people lamenting the loss of the central London area bus route map. Well, I mean, what the hell for? That would be totally incomprehensible, wouldn't it? Very much like our route map was in 1999. So we went through a tremendous pain barrier to put that right. We had the big network upheaval of 2001 when we did away with cross-city services. We introduced colour coding to the network at that point, and we used the overground. Sorry, we used the underground, in truth, probably first group's overground model for our go-to network of high frequency colour coordinated core routes. That is far more intelligent. And if I ask you which bus you get to Carlton Square, you can probably work it out fairly quickly, whereas you'd have had no chance on that previous map, would you? We do have a common brand, Robin Hood. Perhaps we're ahead of the game. Perhaps we had a blue sky moment and saw EPs coming. Most bus stops now display the Robin Hood brand. They don't display an operator. They just display an overarching brand, Robin Hood, and the bus route serving that stop, you'll note in a square with a colour boundary denoting the route brand on that service. This is the core network map that goes in every bus shelter. It's not operator specific, it's specific to Nottingham, but includes all the high frequency services. It is a fact, isn't it? It's unavoidable. The more routes you put on a map, the more complicated it gets. For the number of routes that we're showing on there, that's probably as clear in that diagrammatical form as we're going to get. But I think we are doing our bit to try and make the network as easy to understand as possible. Do we need common route numbers? Well, that's an interesting one. I guess we're fortunate in this area in that if you look at the two key bus operators, we NCT do use route numbers. Trent Barton generally don't. They have a route brand, don't they? Indigo, I4, Copgrave connection, Keyworth connection, mainline. So there's very, very little duplication of route numbers. In fact, I'm not even sure there's any duplication of route numbers, certainly amongst the two key operators, because we use route numbers, Trent Barton use route names. What can we do with our own fares? This is NCT fares before we look at multi-operator. Well, for a long time now, 20 years now, we've been on a flat fare structure. That is the extent of our cash fares on the bus. There's a short hop fare for up to 3 stops. Otherwise, there's an adult single with an under 19 version, an all-day ticket, which applies to all age groups, and a group rider family ticket at £6. But even in the school holidays, we drop that to a £5. So I'm not sure we can make our fares any easier to understand. The problem you get, if it is a problem, and I do question whether it is a problem, is that the tram has its own fare scale, not dissimilar to ours, probably a similar number of tickets, but not always the same price. Trent Barton generally has the same scale. They don't offer a day ticket specific to our operating area. They have zigzag, which can complicate things slightly. So I question whether it is an issue, but you can't get away from the fact it has 3 key operators. There's always potentially 3 different fare scales. We've overcome that largely, I believe, by moving to off-bus sales. We've had smart card ticketing for over 20 years now. Easy Rider Every Day is the continuous day ticket. There's adult, under 19 and student versions of those, because we treat the student market and the under 19 market differently. under 19, generally lower first students. We have the any day version, which is, if you like, cartel ticket. So you buy 3 days of travel, but it's not 3 consecutive days. And again, adult under 19 student versions of that. And with the number of concessionary passages that we have, around about 2/3 of all customer transactions are made on smart card. So whilst we've got simplified cash fare structure, it's decreasingly important, should I say, if that's the right phrase, because our customers increasingly are moving to off-bus sales. One of the unique things we do, you'll all be familiar with staff passes. We have staff passes. Drivers sign on to their ticket machines with their staff pass, as well as giving them access into the depot building. Students have a similar passes, of course. It's generally their security pass into their hall of residence, gets them onto campus, is generally their stored value card for the refectories. It's also their NCT bus ticket, in that we're able to use the same platform. We offer Nottingham students an academic year bus pass for £279, and that generally goes onto their university ID card as well. And we sell around about 13,500 of those. Mobile ticketing is increasingly important. 50% of all day tickets are now bought by people using the mobile phone. And increasingly, that's going to become more important. We have the multi-operator smart card. It's almost, dare I say, old technology now. To top up your Robin Hood smart card, you have to use one of the on-street vending machines. You can't as yet top up your Robin Hood card online, which is something we recognise we need to put right. But we think the future is this EMV, bank card travel. We were behind the curve on this. Nottingham wasn't at the front of EMV travel. Other areas may have been 12, 18 months in front of us. But we've now been offering tap and go travel on NCT buses since September last year. We'll be offering what's called the retail model from back end of this September. So hopefully customers will be able to buy any cash ticket, including group rider, park and ride return, using their EMV card as well. The issue has been we don't use Ticketer. Ticketer was ahead of the game, credit where it's due, and in it, who did a fantastic job, it has to be said, with National Express West Midlands, getting their cash contactless EMV off the ground. Took a bit longer with us. We hope to have Robin Hood on EMV platform by the end of this year too, but we're still working on that. So we see Nottingham contactless potentially as an overarching brand for Nottingham's bus ticketing. And early days, we're keen to explore the technology opportunities. It may be that whether you're on NCT's rider, the tram zone tickets, or Robin Hood, it may be that there can be one platform and one address you go to where you can check on your bus travel and what you've been spending. That's something we're keen to explore through the BSIP. Do we need better integration with other modes? Well, the reason, taking nothing away from their achievements, of course, but the reason why Trent Barton has such a strong network of trunk routes linking outlying districts and Derby is because rail plays a very small role in Nottingham's journey to work area. Rail was never really a big factor for local journeys in Nottingham. But even on this map, this Robin Hood map, it does show the Robin Hood line linking Nottingham to Mansfield via Hucknall. It does show, of course, the tram routes. and it does show the high frequency NCT routes, most of the Trent Barton services, and even a couple of City Council supported services that provide unique links. So rail is in there, but it's not a big player. In the city centre area, and it's an issue shared by so many cities, the railway station isn't particularly central. It's on the southern extreme of the city centre area. We don't do cross-city anymore. Even if we did do cross-city, we couldn't link every part of Nottingham to the railway station. So what we do market very heavily is our City Loop service. So all services coming through from West Bridgeford, over Trent Bridge, past the railway station to the city centre, do a one-way City Loop, providing a 3-minute service linking the railway station to the main destinations in the city centre, and crucially, the key bus interchange points at Victoria Centre and in the Market Square. So could we do more to improve the way buses serve Nottingham railway station? Perhaps not. What we could perhaps do better is perhaps market even more strongly the City Loop facility. And we do need to think about what we do with this in terms of fares, because clearly if you're coming into Nottingham from an outlying area on the Trent Barton bus, for example, then it will cost you another additional fare to use our City Loop service. So something perhaps, well, definitely food for thought there. Now, very contentious one. Is Nottingham overbussed, and would we benefit from taking bus resource off the busiest corridors and putting them onto less well-bussed corridors? Well, you know, I'm amongst friends here. I think we can be in general agreement, can we, that moving resource from very busy profitable routes to less profitable routes isn't overnight going to make people use them and give us the same return from those less well-used services. And I think it's fair to say at this point in time, we don't have the competition in Nottingham that we had in the days of Nottingham Omnibus, CAMS, if you remember that far back, perhaps Your Bus and Premier more recently. So there isn't competition in way of replication of services. There are some busy routes shared between NCT, Trent Barton, to a smaller extent CT4N, but we are generally going to different destinations. It's just that there's only so many radial routes out of the city centre. So there's no desire and no realistic prospect, I think, to move resource. I think what this is really getting at, the aspiration here, is perhaps to avoid the Sheffield scenarios that we had probably at the end, well, in the early days of DREG. If you've read Gary Nolan's book, they'll get a plug in for Gary. If you've read Gary Nolan's book, then he alludes to the difficulties they had with congestion in Sheffield city centre in those early days of DREG. Is that what they're really talking about here? We do have some form of regulation under the Nottingham Statutory Quality Partnership Scheme, in that although Nottingham doesn't have much in way of bus stations, I know we have Victoria and the soon to reopen Broadmarsh bus station, but you know, they're not high capacity bus stations. Certainly all city services go on street, go from on street stops, but we have introduced bus station regulation on those stops. So we have, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, bus stands on street as well as bus stops, to regulate the flow of buses, because you must understand, in a compact city centre like Nottingham, where city services are on street, we do sometimes get justified complaints that there are too many buses. As the city centre has been pedestrianised, we've lost a lot of curb space in the Market Square, a lot of curb space around Trinity Square, which has concentrated buses into smaller areas around Parliament Street and Milton Street. And to keep public support, I think, and political support, we need to be able to show that we are regulating bus movements. In this area of King Street, where there's been political pressure for some time to pedestrianise it, you can visualise King Street, it's just up from the Market Square, where the Brian Clough statue is. This photograph, I took this photograph at 8 o'clock in the morning, when the dust cart is there, removing the commercial waste. Clearly, there is need for some regulation of services to keep politicians on side that we have got the situation under control. Stop K3, you can see there. It isn't a stop, it's a stand. It has a maximum capacity of 12 departures an hour. That's 12 5-minute slots. So service 27 on 10-minute frequencies, is offer 6 departures an hour. 24, 25 each offer 3 departures an hour. So that stand is filled with a 5-minute service going up Carlton Road. It's not ideal, we have 14 departures an hour on Carlton Road. So 2 departures on another service for Carlton have been displaced. Service 43 to Stentondale operates 8 times an hour on a 7-8 minute frequency. Under the slot booking arrangement we've got, that fills the stand. The stand is at capacity at a 7-8 minute headway. Stop K3 works on Patney, which is the 12 5-minute departures an hour. That's made up of 6 departures an hour on service 44, running every 10 minutes. Service 26 is the route displaced, is the Carlton Road route we've had to displace off K1 onto K3, which runs half hourly. So there's 8 departures an hour there, 4 departures vacant. But it works and it keeps politicians on side. The stops have a capacity of 20 departures an hour, so 10 departures in any 30-minute period. You'll see on that plate there, that's used exclusively by Trent Barton for the Rainbow One and Red Arrow routes. No indication of the operator on the plate. That's the overarching Robin Hood brand, but clearly their route branding is clearly displayed. Sorry. Stop U4, that's got the old City Council brand, so clearly I'll make a note that that Robin Hood brand needs to be applied on there. That's 2 separate operators, but to the uninitiated you wouldn't know. 4 and N4 being Nottingham City Transport routes, 8 departures an hour. Trent's 2 between Nottingham and Ilkeston running 6 times an hour. So again, there's empty capacity there. But when we talk about the overarching brand, I think there's some of the way there already. A shared stop that works well between 2 different operators. We generally do actually tend to try and avoid using stops used by other operators, because if you do want to change your times, it's a mammoth task. And let's face it, if we want to adjust our time slightly, in order to maintain the slot booking arrangement, you've got to try and avoid the other operator to modify their times at all. They're under no obligation to do so. So it is simply easier to try and avoid stops already used by other operators. Do we need faster services? Well, I've put that picture on there for a reason. Bus lanes and bus priority is not a new phenomenon to Nottingham. We had our first 24/7 bus lane as long ago as 1975. For those of you familiar with it, this is the bus lane on Mansfield Road between what we call Goose Fair Island at Gregory Boulevard, coming in towards the city centre. You can see 3 Atlanteans there utilising that bus lane. Bus lanes have continued to develop. We did have a hiatus in the early 80s when bus lanes went out of political fashion, but they have come back. Today in Greater Nottingham, we have more than 30 kilometres of bus lane, which are very valuable, very important to us. Is there scope for more bus lanes? The truth is, probably not, but what there is scope to do is extend their hours of operation. And what we would like to do is take advantage of the various active travel initiatives that are around at the moment. Through Transforming Cities funding, money's been made available for active travel initiatives. This one is a cycle lane over Trent Bridge. We're petitioning the local authority to actually make it a bus and cycle lane over Trent Bridge, and that would give us continuous bus lane then all the way from the city centre right through to West Bridgeford town centre. This is where the bus lane starts on Maid Marian Way. It's 24/7, takes in Canal Street, Carrington Street past the railway station, then down Meadows Way to Trent Bridge. Currently we have no bus lane on Trent Bridge, but we do have a bus lane on Bridgeford Road coming out of West Bridgeford. If we could get the bus lane in on Trent Bridge, we're then almost at continuous bus lane on this key bus corridor. So that's the kind of thing we want to take advantage of and put in as initiative in the bus service improvement plan. You'll be pleased to know I'm coming to the end of my top 10 considerations. The other one is this one. Nottingham's not been afraid to trial alternative fuels. As I said, this potentially is the big saviour for the bus industry. If we're able and the funding is there to adopt alternative carbon neutral fuels. We already boast the biggest fleet of biogas XX in the world. We did play with ethanol 10 years ago. The ethanol project failed because we didn't get the tax advantage that we had with diesel. So ethanol didn't qualify for rebate in the way that diesel did. But for the last 6 years, we've very much been concentrating on biomethane on the basis it's a tried and tested technology, been available on the continent for many years. Scania well versed in producing biomethane powered vehicles. It's worked to our advantage and it's been a good boost for Nottingham. The City Council, on the other hand, have been running a fleet of electric buses probably also for about 10 years now. We've always been very nervous about electric technology. We have suffered very much from what is called, I think, range anxiety. Certainly the first electric buses the City Council purchased for its tendered operations had a range of about 5 hours, which is no good for a commercial bus operation such as ours. But things are moving on, technology is moving on. We've had a look at the Citaro. We'll probably be bringing that back on demonstration to Nottingham during October. And we're also keen to look at the options shortly available from Volvo and Scania, in addition to what's available from ADL. We have put a submission in partnership with the City Council through the Zebra Fund. We're seeking £20 million of funding through that, which will enable us to convert Trent Bridge Garage, or at least the midibus fleet, the entire midibus fleet at Trent Bridge Garage, 78 vehicles, to electric bus operation. We've put the initial bid in. We've now been asked to go to the next stage and do the business case. So we're very excited about what that may hold for the future. Coming to an end now, despite all of what I've said, shiny buses on their own, carbon neutral buses on their own, won't be enough to get us back to where we were before COVID, and hopefully even better. We know, don't we? Bus travel is a derived demand. People need to have a reason to travel. The high street is undergoing tremendous change. I suspect one of the reasons why we've got this huge shortage of truck drivers at the moment is because of the explosion in the home delivery market. Bus travel is derived demand. We have to hope and work with our partners to ensure that buses are part of the new post-COVID world, which means continuing to work in partnership, whether it's within the in-house partnership or not, with our local authority partners, also our business partners, the likes of our business improvement districts, and so forth. because we need to keep buses at the top of the agenda beyond the 3 years, potential 3 years of the BSIP. So to conclude, City and County will be having separate BSIPs. Nottinghamshire counties will concentrate on Mansfield, Newark, Retford, the outer areas, but the districts of Gedling, Broxtowe and Rushcliffe will be included in a Greater Nottingham BSIP, reflecting the journey to work area, commuter area. We'll use the existing Nottingham Bus Quality Partnership statutory scheme as the basis for our EP. Undoubtedly, we will reposition the Robin Hood in the Robin Hood multi-operator ticket in the market. We're keen to get to contactless capped day ticketing on bank cards, covering the 3 key operators in Nottingham by the end of this year. And a review of ticketing will be one of the key aspects of our BSIP, I have no doubt. We will be pushing for more bus priority. I don't think that will particularly manifest itself in any more kilometres of bus lane, other than hopefully Trent Bridge, but certainly longer periods of operation. Many of our bus lanes are currently peak hour only. We'd like to see them for a long period of operation, if not 24/7. I don't think the network will particularly change. It's already a very intense turn up and go urban network. I'm not expecting the route network to change particularly at all, but clearly there's going to be great emphasis on moving to carbon neutral buses. Nottingham has a CN28 programme. That's a very ambitious target to be carbon neutral by 2028. Clearly Nottingham City Transport will be a key player in achieving that, hence the initial Zebra scheme. But finally, and to conclude, this may be a 3-year window. We have to make the most of it, and it should give us confidence to hope that in 3 years' time, we are at least back to levels of patronage that we were experienced before the shock of COVID. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, right, we there? Thank you, David.
Will I stop screen sharing?
Yeah.
Which may be easier said than done.
Hang on.
There we go.
I'm back.
On my back, can you see me? Yeah.
Yeah, here we all are. David, thank you very, very much. That was well, fascinating and positive stuff. Perhaps demonstrating why Nottingham, perhaps amongst few other places, really doesn't need a bus service improvement plan, but nevertheless, go for it, obviously.
And we do need the money from it. Hence Nicola's comment,
Yeah.
we've got to make it sexier.
Exactly.
So we'll be working on that in the next few weeks.
Let's get through that rough period that we're already in and going through. Okay, question time. We've got, if you look at the clock, we've got half an hour, let's say, for questions. Let's hope there are some. Can you raise your hands electronically if you wish to ask David a question, and then I'll select you from the list. I can't see one at the moment, but any questions out there? I could perhaps ask one to bounce it off. I've thought for some time now that the multi-operator one price ticket is what we ought to be looking for, particularly in urban areas, and not at a discount from the individual operators' own offers. Because all that does, in fact, is highlight that there are a number of different operators. It even applies in Nottingham, actually. A number of different operators charging different things at different times and so on and so forth. BSIP really, I think, ought to address how do you get through that one, how do you get through the rather tricky financial issues that are involved with that. Any comments on that, David, in respect particularly of Nottingham, I think?
I think it's easier said than done. Competition Commission hasn't gone away. DFT haven't explained how we would overcome that if we wanted to move to perhaps a common fare scale, if that is the ultimate wish. we've all worked for 30 years in commercial businesses where it's been about protecting our market share, growing our market share, not worrying about the others, perhaps at the expense of the others. And it is a sea change and a big change of thought process. Now, we are all mature operators in Nottingham, as in we're all established operators. There may be a willingness, well, I believe there is a willingness to look at that. The difficulty comes, I guess, if one operator is faced with a particular massive increase in cost, whatever that cost may be. Let's say NCT's got a good hedged price on fuel, but another operator hasn't, and there is an overnight huge inflationary increase in fuel. A Gulf War, heaven forbid, something like that. And that operator needs to put its prices up. That's where it would fall down. So the concept is okay. Probably is something we should be looking to move towards. But sitting here tonight, Jeff, I haven't got the answer as to how we're practically going to achieve that.
Yeah.
But other views may be available.
Yeah. Do you think the Competition Commission would swing in at that point and cause problems?
We've been told for 30 years you cannot discuss fares.
Yeah.
And the only umbrella in which we've ever been able to discuss fares has been through the multi-operator group. But even then, it's been about discussing premium on fares. We're certainly not allowed, and probably never wanted, to discuss our general fares policy and what our future fares levels are going to be. That's been off the table, quite rightly so, I think.
Yeah. Okay, understood, David. There are problems.
It's a big change.
Richard Delahoy, come in, please.
Yeah, good evening. David, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Congratulations on running such an excellent business. I use your services when I'm there in Nottingham business.
Richard, we're not getting.
I think you need to come nearer to the PC.
Sorry. Let's try this. Is that better?
That's better.
Yeah, okay, the mic plays up on this device. Sorry. Thank you for a fascinating talk and congratulations on running an excellent business, which I experienced at first hand. You've talked about how CBSSG has helped. I think without that underwriting of operating losses over the last year or more, much of the industry would frankly have collapsed by now. CBSSG is now finished. We've got this uncertain recovery scheme where nobody's got the faintest idea how much they're going to get from it at the moment. BSIPs will come in eventually. So what's going to happen for the next 6-9 months? Trying to get through without operating losses being underwritten, but with only 65% of passengers there. Can the industry actually survive long enough without drastic cuts in services to get BSIPs actually start to make a difference?
It's a very good, thank you for your comments, Richard, your complimentary comments. You ask a very good question, and it's probably something that we've all spent time thinking about. And if anything keeps me awake, it's this subject. How do we get through the next 7 months? But also, how do we get beyond that? You're right, CBSSG was a godsend. And when I complimented the government earlier, it was for putting that scheme in place so quickly and underwriting our costs, gave us certainty that we could continue to trade. And indeed, when we signed off our accounts for last year, our auditors were only willing to sign us off as a going concern because of the existence of CBSSG. And I'm sure that was the case across the UK bus industry. This year is going to be interesting because CBSSG finished on the 31st of August. And we sit here on the 7th of September. I said this to the trade union today, but I don't think they quite believe me. I said, look, we're sitting here on the 7th of September, and I can't tell you what the bus recovery fund is worth to us. It is quite incredible, really. We're making a best guess on what it's worth, knowing that there's 226 million available, at least. I suspect if the industry cries foul, more will be found, but I think it will have to come out of the 3 billion that's been set aside for enhanced partnership and BSIP and low emission buses and the rest of it. So that 1.8 billion that I already think is left may turn out to be less than 1.8 billion. We'll have to see how we go. It all comes down, doesn't it, to how quickly patronage returns and what level it returns to. The thoughts going through our heads are, we can't leave it to chance. We can't sit on our hands in the blind faith that patronage will return to a level whereby bus recovery funding is enough. So we have got to look at our levels of service. And I know DFT have said to get the funding, we want you to run at least 90% of your 2019 mileage. Well, you know, we've got to be a bit more hard-faced than that, I think. And if patronage doesn't return in the next month or so, we seriously have to look at the level of service providing, because as a commercial business, there are two things you can do, isn't there? Take out cost and try and increase your revenue. So we've got to do a bit of both of those. But I think taking out some cost and taking away perhaps some frequency or the least well-used routes may be something that we have to do before we get to April next year. I don't want to sound negative, I've deliberately tried to keep it positive this afternoon, but Richard does ask a very telling question. We've got to get to 31st, well, we've got to get to 1st of April next year before we can access any funding that's available through BSIP. That is going to be a massive challenge. But we're commercial businesses, what can we do? It's take out, if the patronage isn't there and the funding isn't enough, we've got two options. Take out fares, take out cost, or try and get more revenue. And the way we traditionally do that is by increasing fares. That would be the last thing we want to do, but clearly you can increase your fares by CPI under the recovery funding arrangement. I suspect there will be quite a lot of that going on, which is counterintuitive, I accept, at a time when we're trying to get people back onto buses.
Thank you. It's something I'm struggling with the operators, small operators I work with. You know, just all got our fingers crossed. Thank you for a very honest answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Good question. Next in line is Gary Nolan, please. Gary?
I'm here. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, David. Excellent speech.
Great book, Gary.
Well, thank you for the plug for the book as well. And congratulations on your appointment, even though you've been, you've got feet on the table now for long enough. I think there's a lot of positive thoughts in the national bus strategy, but like you said, the devil is going to be in the detail. Certainly when you're talking about competition commission regarding fares, we've also got competition commission regarding network, where we've not been allowed to discuss for many years with other operators, you do that and I'll do this. And that's what the national bus strategy is looking for. So I think there's quite a few hurdles to jump before we get to where it wants us to be. And I think a lot of it, when you look at your top 10 list, a lot of it is based on thinking that everywhere's like London. Single brand, high frequency routes, low fares, capping, integration. And unfortunately, not everywhere is like London. You've got certain areas, it's not so bad in Nottingham where you have 2 or 3 operators, but there are certain areas within the country where there are multiple operators, where there's no multiple operator ticketing, networks are overlapping, so there will be a lot to sort out with those. But I seem to recall that CBSSG was about £27 million a week. If we're talking about 226 million to go forward, that's only 9 weeks. So as we mentioned earlier, as Richard mentioned, what's going to fill the gap, and how do we get over this sort of negative hump before we get all the positive stuff. And I don't think we'll see any positive stuff from April. I think it will take a lot longer for it to come through. You know, the DFT have got to plough through 79 BSIPs and decide then on how much it's all going to cost and probably scale it all back. So I think we've got some bad times to come before it gets a little bit rosier if the government is still in power then. That's another uncertainty. But I think you've covered everything excellently. I think you're in the thick of it, and I don't envy you one bit. And there's not a lot to look forward to, but like you, I want to be positive. I love the industry. I think we've got to get through this to make sure that we do have a future.
Thank you, Gary. And I think you're quite right. I think the bus industry is fortunate. I think it's generally managed by people with a lot of passion who care very strongly about the industry, and by hook or by crook, we'll make it work, won't we?
Yeah.
But going on to some of the comments you've made, particularly about networks, you're quite right. We're fortunate in Nottingham. Really, NCT and Trent Barton, the other significant operator, we generally complement each other, don't we? We run the city routes, Trent Barton run the interurban stuff. So there's no obvious need to coordinate those services. Indeed, Trent Barton run on much faster journey times than us, because we are providing the stopping city service. They're providing the faster interurban routes. If they were stopping at every local stop, they would alienate their customers, and have always thankfully taken that approach. So I think we're safe from that. I don't think there is a need for us to coordinate our networks, because the frequencies are high and attractive as well. And if you want the low fare stopping service, you catch NCT. If you are perhaps prepared to pay a bit more, you can catch the faster Trent Barton bus into town from the outlying areas. I wouldn't want to be in an area that's got competition, where you've got someone replicating your own routes, because it goes against the grain to perhaps commit to sharing a route with someone who's competing with you. Thankfully, we're not in that scenario, and my sympathy would go to anyone that is, although perhaps after 18 months of COVID, that might not be the case anywhere. I can't think of many examples at the moment. But yeah, you're right, Gary. The document's got a lot of good aspirational stuff in it. Getting there is not going to be easy at all.